27. One really clear lesson that we might as well throw it in while we're here. Have faith in what God has told you, regardless of what the situation looks like. And that's, too, another thing that's very difficult for us sometimes, because we, like Saul, allow what's in front of us to influence us. And we feel like, oh, it can't be, it's not going to happen. You know, think of poor Abraham. God promised him at 75, you're going to have a baby. And now he's 85 years old, 86 years old. He thinks, it's been 16 years, 11 years since God promised me. Maybe I need to help God. So he gets Hagar pregnant, and we're still reaping the problems and the not benefits, but problems from that today. And so finally, when he's 99 years old, it's been 24 years since God made the promise, and now he has his son, he has Isaac. We need to have faith in what God has told us, because God's going to keep his word, always. He's going to keep his word for David. He had said David will be the next king. I was sharing yesterday with the Bible quiz team. I've been teaching them through the book of Philippians, and we finished Philippians yesterday. We were talking about having faith and holding steady, and one of the boys shared an illustration of Stonewall Jackson during the Civil War. And the story that he told was just fascinating. He said that Stonewall Jackson would sit on a wall. This is why he got his name. He'd sit on the wall during the war, during the conflict, and the bullets would be whizzing past him. And he just sat there. And somebody said to him, "Why are you just sitting there?" He says, "Because I have faith in my God. And it's not, you know, if it's my time to go, I'm going to go. But if it's not, I'm not going to go." You know? That's faith. David didn't have that faith at this point, okay? I'm thinking, as he's sharing that, I'm thinking, wow, I don't know if I have that kind of faith. You know, bullets going right past you, you know, you raise your arm, one goes underneath your arm. It's like, wow, that was close. I think I'd have been hiding. But David kind of said, you know, I'm getting out of here. And that's why he went to this place in Achish. Now, one of the things that just fascinates me about David, and I thrill at the chance to get to share this with you, but David lived with the Philistines for 1 year and 4 months. And while he was there, a number of things happened. Now, one of the things that I didn't know until today was that it's very possible that David may have picked up some of the Philistine culture musically. Now, David was a musical guy. He already played the harp. And again, it wasn't one of those big, huge harps, you know, that they got to reach out like this and you know, they roll them around on those wheels and stuff. It was probably a little thing that he held in his arm that he kind of played on. So David was musical. He had already been writing some of the Psalms. But I found this interesting note in one of the commentaries. It said that they thought that while David was living at Gath, he played his music and played with them some music, because the titles of Psalms 8, 81, and 84 say, "upon the gittith." And that's a feminine adjective that comes from the word Gath. Now, later on, we're going to hear about a guy who was a Gittite. Well, a Gittite is somebody who lives in Gath. And so this particular commentator felt like that those comments on those particular psalms were indicating a musical style, kind of a Philistine musical style. Now, what does that say to us? I think it's pretty fascinating. Don't be afraid of a different culture than your own unless there's something morally wrong with it. David was there with these people in the city of Gath, and very likely was playing his music, and somebody else, maybe one of the Philistines, came by and they were saying, hey, they started playing, and they were playing maybe a little extra stuff along with it. And David was like, well, how'd you do that? Can you teach me how to do that? And David picked up on it. And well, there's nothing wrong with getting connected to people of other cultures. And just because we don't do something in our culture doesn't mean it's wrong. So don't be afraid of it if there's nothing morally wrong with it. So I think one thing that happened is he may have picked up some of the musical style from them, but he also made friends. And he influenced the king. And I say, how do you know he influenced the king? Well, for one thing, the king let him stay there. Now, maybe the king was just taking a risk, and he's thinking, this is going to be to my benefit, it's going to be to my advantage. But it's also possible that he just kind of liked David. I think that's why he let David go to begin with. I think he saw something about David that was different, and it appealed to him. And I think now that when David's back, even though David's at a low point in his life, and we're going to see in a couple of minutes, he's doing things that we cannot really sanction, yet David still had some faith in God and was having an influence. Later on, after he's been there a year and 4 months, in the next chapter or two, we're going to see where the king says to him, you are like an angel of God in my eyes. This is a heathen king. It's a pagan king who worshiped Dagon, and yet this pagan king who worships Dagon is going to say to David, you were like an angel of God in my eyes. Sounds to me like David had rubbed off on him. I don't know that he came to a full faith in God. I don't know that, but I think it's evidence that there was at least some influence that was shared there. If you are forced to live away from home, make friends where you are. How many of you grew up in this area? Okay, any of you kind of transplants from somewhere else? Okay. Sometimes, we look around us and we get moved because of business or something else, and we don't want to connect to other people. David was misplaced because Saul was trying to take his life. And what did David do? David made friends. You say, well, how do you know that, Pastor Barry? Because later, when David becomes king, David has this group of men who are fiercely loyal to him. They are his personal bodyguard. And you only take the people that you know and you can totally trust their loyalty to be your bodyguard. They called them the Kerethites and the Pelethites. The Kerethites and Pelethites are Philistines. And they were David's most trusted bodyguard when he was king. When David left because Absalom was trying to kill him later on in David's life story, the Kerethites and Pelethites went with him. They were some of his most trusted and closest associates, and they were Philistines. Where did David meet them? Right here. In this low time in his life, in this low point in David's life, David had connected with these people. I've mentioned to you several times, David's just a likable kind of guy. He's the kind of guy that people just, when you met him, you just liked him. You walked away saying, you know what, I like that guy. He's kind of neat. And the Philistines were the same way. And so, now, what goes on, though, is after they've been there a while, David says, you know what, we really appreciate you letting us stay and inviting us here in the royal city, but why should we stay in the royal city? Can you give us a place where we could live and kind of not be in your way? And so Achish gives him a city called Ziklag. Now, if you look back into the history of Ziklag, it had been part of Judah before, was part of what had been portioned out, I believe, under Joshua. And now it's been captured by the Philistines, but there is some thought that it was a vacant city. And David knew about this. And so David said, how about you let us have... So the king said, okay, you can go to Ziklag. So David and his men, 600 men, all their families, they all went to Ziklag. And they didn't stay idle. What they would do is they would go out on raids, and they would go raiding these nomadic peoples that were causing problems to Israel. And these people had made raids on Israel. They'd come up into the land and take things and come back. Well, David would go and his men, and they would attack a group of them. And he would have some time to sit down and kind of debrief with Achish. And you'll notice this is what he says. They would go up and they would raid like the Geshurites, verse 8, the Gerzites and the Amalekites. But when David attacked an area, he didn't leave a man or a woman alive. He took sheep and cattle, donkeys and camel and clothes, and then he would come back to Achish. Achish would say, "Where'd you go raiding today?" David said, "Against the Negev of Judah." Is that where he went? No, it wasn't. And we can't excuse the fact that David lied. Some of the commentators felt like these were people that were part of what God had, they were part of the groups that God had commanded Saul and David and his people to wipe them out. But when you look at it from just a pure human standpoint, you have to think, wow, David doesn't seem to be acting on any kind of a divine imperative. You remember how before David would say, "Lord, are we supposed to do this? Are we supposed to go and chase these people?" There's none of that here. David's just doing it. David's out there. As I said, this is like one of the lists, the second lowest place in David's, maybe even the lowest place in David's life. So he's wiping out all these people, but he's getting richer and richer all the time. So he keeps lying to Achish. And whenever he asked him, he would say, "Well, against the Negev of Judah, or the Negev of Jeremiah, or against the Negev of the Kenites." But he didn't leave anybody alive because he thought they might tell what we've been doing. They might say something. So, now as we come to the end of this, you'll see what Achish is thinking in his mind. Achish trusted David, verse 12, and said to himself, "He has become so obnoxious to his people, the Israelites, he'll be my servant for life. I got this guy." Well, he thinks he's playing David, but David's playing him. And so there's some really good stuff, though, to learn here. First off, if something seems too good to be true, it probably is. He's thinking to himself, "This guy, he was in line to be the next king of Israel, and he's here with me. He wants to be my friend. He wants to help me. He wants to work alongside me. He always honors me as the king." And he's thinking to himself, "Wow, I'm kind of moving up several notches among all these other kings of the Philistines. If something seems too good to be true, it probably is. Especially if somebody calls you on the phone and they say to you, 'All you have to do is give me some of your information and I'm going to give you,' hang up on them. You know, it's unfortunate, but when we hit the area, and you guys can ignore me here, they're not senior citizens, because a lot of us in here are, but any of you that are not could just turn me off. But they take advantage of people because they think seniors are dumb. They think they're gullible, and some are. But don't be. If something sounds too good to be true, it probably is. You don't get anything for nothing. You're not going to, I get these emails, and I don't know if anybody else gets them. "My dearly beloved, I have come into $5.6 million, and all I need is somebody in the United States that will sign for it." Come on, I mean, really?
Please send me so much money.
Yeah, just give me the information, and they just want to steal your information, And I just have to laugh and shake my head and think, how stupid do you think we are? People. I wish, sure, I'd love for somebody from Pakistan or somewhere else to give me $5.4 million. But it's not going to happen. It's too good to be true. And that's what it was here. If it's too good to be true, it probably is. Be honest and above board in all your dealings, regardless of circumstances. David probably rationalized, he did rationalize in his mind, I have to do this to survive. David already had the word of the Lord through Samuel that he would be the next king, which meant he wasn't going to die. Now, maybe this is a bad connection here, but I don't know if any of you watch shows on television that have like a series, and you might be in the middle, and my wife and I, we might be watching something, and somebody's in a really bad situation. It looks like they may not be able to make it. And then they show a clip from next week's. And the person's there and they're alive and they're okay. And you're like, oops, don't have to worry about it now because I know they're going to make it. I just saw next week they're alive. Well, David could have done that with Samuel's words, because Samuel had said, you're going to be the next king. And so it doesn't matter what he goes through. He's going to come out the other side and he's going to be okay. But he didn't. So be honest and above board. Here's another one. Look for receptive hearts wherever you go. God has got receptive hearts all over. In the most uncomfortable, unpredictable, undesirable situations, there are receptive hearts there. Who would have thought that among the Philistines, David would make connections that would last his lifetime? And they did. Those Kerethites and Pelethites, they were there right up until David's death. He made connections of people that were hungry. There were receptive hearts. Now, we're going to wrap up with just some leadership lessons from Achish. I find Achish a tremendous leader. And I know a lot of people wouldn't look at it that way. He's a pagan king. How can you call him an excellent leader? Because he was. Listen to these things. Number one, he was a leader who was willing to give people a chance. He let David stay. He was willing to let this guy who could have been harmful to him, who could have been working on some hidden motives, he let him stay. He took a chance on him. He was a leader who believed people could change. David was the giant killer. Goliath was from Gath. Achish was the king of Gath. David had killed his champion. And yet he gives David a chance. He believes that David could change. Number three, he was a leader who forgave past offenses. In order for him to let David stay, he had to have forgiven him for deceiving him. Maybe David and Achish had a laugh together. Maybe they kind of chuckled and said, yeah, so what'd you actually think when I was clawing on the door and the spit was running down my beard? Did you really fall for it? Did I get you? I don't know. Maybe they did. Maybe they didn't. But he forgave David for that. Forgave him for killing their champion. Number four, he was a leader who trusted those under him almost to a fault. These things are all characteristics that are good characteristics for leaders. He trusted David. He was a leader that recognized how important it was to have strong leaders under him. He was a leader who was not threatened by strong leaders. Some leaders, I remember hearing about this one pastor. He hired an assistant. And first day the assistant was on the job, he took him up to the pulpit. He took a piece of chalk. And he drew a circle all around the pulpit. And he said to him, stay out of the circle. Some people are threatened by strong leaders under them. That guy definitely was. Achish wasn't. He knew David was a strong leader. He knew people called David the next king. He knew he was a great warrior. But he took a chance on him. He let him come and be a part of what was going on. Another thing was, he was a good judge of leadership ability. He was willing to take a risk. And he didn't really even see it as a risk. But the Philistine leaders in next week's lesson will say to him, hey, listen, he's not going to battle with us. No way. He might turn on us. They understood the risk. Achish was willing to take the risk. He was a leader who was willing to invest in another leader on purpose to get benefits later, and a leader who believed in increasing responsibility for those under him. And so I think he was a good model of leadership, not of faith, unless he came to faith later on. Now, one final note about Achish. Because there's been a significant time span, and he's even mentioned later on the name Achish, it would seem that this particular king of the Philistines had a reign that lasted about 50 years. Is that possible? Yes, it is. In fact, there was one king of Israel that we'll get to later on, actually the worst king that Judah ever had, reigned for 55 years. Aren't you glad? I don't need to say any more. Thank God it's not that day and time, okay? All right, let's bow our heads for prayer. Father, thank you for the things you've taught us tonight from David. Help us, Lord, to trust you even when it looks like your promises are not being fulfilled. Help us to trust you anyway. And help us to hold steady, Lord, that we might have more of the faith that Stonewall Jackson is reported to have had, where danger can go whizzing past us and we're calm and we're relaxed because you're in control. So Lord, help us as we're watching David's life and we're watching him learn and being tested. We pray that you would help us, that we too will pass the test and that we can be true to the calling that you have placed upon our lives. In the name of Jesus, we pray.